Hi guys, this is Mr. Donahue. Today we're going to be reading The Amazing Christmas Extravaganza by David Shannon. It all started with one little string of tiny white Christmas lights. In the past, Mr. Merriweather had been happily celebrating Christmas with his wife and his children, Matthew and Sarah. Each year he made a big show of getting the box of Christmas ornaments down from the attic. Then the Merriweather family decorated the tree together and hung a wreath on the front door. But this Christmas was different. This year we're really going to celebrate Christmas, he announced. This year we're going to put lights on the house. They were all very excited. Mrs. Merriweather clapped her hands and Sarah hopped on one foot. Then Mr. Merriweather hauled his ladder outside and tacked up a small string of white lights around the front window. "That's fine," he said, admiring his handiwork. He left the lights on all night so he could see the glow from his bedroom window. And he went to sleep a happy man. There he is. "Kind of skimpy little string of lights you got there, pal." Mr. Merriweather stopped shoveling and turned to see Mr. Clack, his neighbor from across the street. "Wait till you see my house," Mr. Clack bragged. "I got 17 strings of lights, and they blink on and off." Mr. Merriweather was suddenly embarrassed. Well, yeah, I'm not done yet. Wait till I'm finished, and then I guess you'll see something. He pulled his hat down over his ears and then went back to his shoveling. Mr. Clack. That afternoon, Mr. Merriweather glanced up at the kids and drove the station wagon to 5 big department stores. He brought so many Christmas decorations he couldn't even close the tailgate. He could hardly wait to get home and put them all up. "Can we really afford all that?" Mrs. Merriweather asked him when she saw the decorations. "Of course we can, honey," Mr. Merriweather said. "It's Christmas." That night, he peeked out of his bedroom window and saw Mr. Clack's starting up at the new display. He chuckled to himself when Mr. Clack kicked the snow and stomped on home. That's some decorations he's going to put up. The next day, Mr. Merriweather's neighbor stopped by to tell him how wonderful the house looked. He had never gotten so many compliments. They made him feel giddy and full inside, like he had just eaten a big dinner. But still, he thought there was room for improvement. Every morning for the next week, Mr. Merriweather fired up the old station wagon and went in search of more decorations, which he carefully added onto his house with the seriousness of a true artist. And every evening, the neighbors and their kids came out to see the new wonderful sproutings from the House of Lights. "Magnificent," his neighbors exclaimed. "Awesome." Matthew and Sarah's friends told him they were lucky to have such a great dad. "Yeah," Matthew said, a little puzzled. "He's really something." Mrs. Merriweather tried to be understanding, but she was worried. Christmas Day would soon be here, and it seemed that her husband could only think of colored lights and plastic candles. She was relieved when Mr. Merriweather told her he had been to every store that he could find, and there was nothing left to buy. Then she heard the hammer banging and the saw buzzing in the garage. Oh no. Several days later, Mr. Merriweather unveiled what he had made. "It's truly an extravaganza," the neighbors gasped. Mrs. Merriweather flipped a switch and a recording of the 12 Days of Christmas blared out of the loudspeakers. Life-size wooden cutouts filled the yard representing each of the 12 days of Christmas. There were maids a-milking, geese a-laying, lords a-leaping, and even a partridge in a pear tree. "And this is nothing," shouted Mr. Merriweather. "You should see what I'm building next." "Terrific," muttered Mr. Clack. "I like celebrating Christmas as much as the next guy, but this is ridiculous." Mr. Merriweather was no longer thinking about Christmas, however. He was thinking about bigger and brighter lights and more. The next night, Mr. Merriweather was back at work on his extravaganza. "You better come down now, dear," Mrs. Merriweather called up to him. "The children are in the Christmas program tonight." "Sorry, no time," Mr. Merriweather muddled through the mouthful of nails. "I've got too much to do. You go on without me." It was hopeless. Mrs. Merriweather tried to explain to Matthew and Sarah that their father was a very busy man. "I think he's gone a little wacko," Matthew said. "Hush," said his mother. "Don't talk about your father that way." Mr. Merriweather's display continued to grow. One day he put up a Santa's workshop complete with elves. The next day he added a giant snowman made of styrofoam. And finally, he built a 50-foot Santa with a mechanical arm that waved. That's a pretty big display now. Whoop, wrong way. Wrong way, sorry. People from 3 counties away brought their children to see how now famous Merriweather's front yard. But it wasn't so much fun anymore for the people who lived nearby. The extravaganza used to be so much electricity, there was hardly any left for the neighbors. Their Christmas trees were dim and dull. Their Christmas cookies came out doughy from ovens that wouldn't heat. The noise from the sightseers honking and yelling was so loud that the annual Christmas caroling had to be canceled. No one could hear the singers. People visiting their families got stranded for hours in the tangle of traffic. Sometimes they just gave up and went home. Mr. Merriweather didn't even notice. He sat snugly in his brightly lit home, humming along with the 12 days of Christmas. Finally, the neighbor decided something had to be done. On Christmas Eve, they held a meeting at Mr. Clack's house. "Let's call the cops," someone shouted. "Let's take them to court," screamed another. "Now, wait a minute," said Mr. Clack. "We don't want to look like a bunch of Scroogers." Just then, all the lights in the neighborhood went out. Up and down the street, everything was black. Everything, that is, except for the Christmas extravaganza, which glowed brighter than ever. "That's the last straw," roared Mr. Clack. "I don't care what people think. I say we tear it down ourselves. Tonight." Everyone yelled in agreement. Then they armed themselves with tools of destruction and swarmed over to Mr. Merriweather's front yard, slashing and bashing and trashing everything in sight. Oh no. Oh no. Mr. Merriweather and his wife woke up in midair. "Oh no, oh my," he wailed. "What is it?" cried the children, running to the room. "I think it's an earthquake," Mr. Merriweather exclaimed. They all dove under the bed and huddled there together, listening to the terrible screeching, cracking, and thumping. It lasted all night long. Finally, the noises stopped. Mr. Merriweather poked his head out from under the bed. It was morning, Christmas morning. He ran downstairs, opened the front door, and couldn't believe what he saw. The Christmas extravaganza was gone. Yesterday, giant snowflakes, Santa Clauses, reindeer, and lights had decorated the house and yard. Now there was only a huge pile of sputtering rubble. Mr. Clack and the rest of the mob were still standing around. Their heavy breaths screamed in the cold morning air. "I guess that will teach you to muck up our neighborhood," Mr. Clack had said. Mr. Merriweather felt as if he had been hit by a log. He could barely talk. But I was celebrating Christmas," he said. "I didn't know it bothered you. I thought you liked it." The neighbors were silent, no longer caught up in their attack. They looked at each other and began to think about what they had done, and they were ashamed. "I'm sorry," Mr. Clack said sheepishly. He picked up a pair of broken reindeer antlers. "Here," he said, "we'll help you put it all back together again. We'll make it even better." Mr. Merriweather shook his head. "No," he said, "I think some nice little white lights will do just fine." He pulled the tiny string out of the smoking heap, and Mr. Clack and all the neighbors helped him tack it up back around the front window. Mr. Merriweather brought out cups of hot cider, and the whole neighborhood admired Mr. Merriweather's little string of white lights, his fine tree, and his beautiful wreath. "You know, Mr. Merriweather," Mr. Clack said, "that really has an amazing Christmas extravaganza." "Thank you," replied Mr. Merriweather. "But these are my real masterpieces." He hugged Matthew and then swung Sarah high up into the air. Mrs. Merriweather took her husband by the arm. "Don't feel bad, dear," she said. "Everyone should be able to celebrate Christmas in their own way, whether it's lots of lights or none at all. Yours just got so big there wasn't room for anyone else." "Well, I've learned my lesson," Mr. Merriweather said. He said with a sigh, "I guess I got carried away." "I think everyone did," Mrs. Merriweather said. "But I'm proud of you. I didn't know you were so artistic." Mr. Merriweather smiled. He gazed at his children, his friends, and his big mound of junk. He noticed that several large pieces of wood were still in good condition. He wondered out loud. How many days till Easter? Oh no. What's he going to do? The end. See what he did? That's so cute. You guys have a great day. We'll see you soon. Bye.